Good morning, everybody. Welcome to BCP Council Cabinet for 22nd of November 2023. My name is Councillor Vicky Slade. I'm the Chair of Cabinet and Leader of the Council. I'm going to, first of all, just double check. Councillor Cox, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to pass straight away to Sarah for housekeeping.
Thank you. Please note that this meeting of the Cabinet is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Please could everyone present follow these ground rules. Only speak when invited to by the leader. If accessing via Teams, always turn on your video function when invited to speak and state your name. Please use your microphones when speaking and mute or turn off your microphone when you are not talking. If you are accessing via Teams and you'd like to speak on an item, please indicate by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. For those in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point along Braidley Road, under the flyover or in the surface car park at the front of the building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So the next item on the agenda is apologies. We have everybody present except for Councillor Mike Cox, who is was unable to get back to us this morning from where he's been overnight. So Mike is online, which means that he is not able to propose or be marked as present, but will be presenting the papers that that he'll be talking to. So everybody else is present. Yes. Item 3. Item 2. Any declarations of interest that anyone needs to declare? No. If anybody does think of anything partway through, do let me know. Agenda item 3, confirmation of minutes. Do I have a proposer for the confirmation of the last cabinet minutes? Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'd love to second that, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. So do we have unanimous agreement on the minutes? Any issues arising? No. In which case we will take that by unanimous agreement. That takes us straight on to agenda item 4, public issues. Sarah, can you confirm whether we've had any petitions, questions or statements submitted?
I can confirm that we've had no petitions, statements or questions submitted by members of the public for agenda items today.
Thank you. Just for clarity, there is a petition that relates to an item that's on the agenda, but that petition is not due to close until the 30th of November. And so therefore it's not at this point that we would take it. But I think Councillor Earl may be referring to that during the item. Agenda item 5 was recommendations from Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We have had an email from the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny to say that he has no items that he wishes to raise on behalf of the committee or himself, and so he will not be attending today. Which takes us straight on to agenda item 6, which is the medium-term financial plan update. For clarity, this isn't the budget. I have had an email from somebody last night who said, how come we've issued a consultation on the budget yesterday, too late for them to make any comments for today's committee? The budget consultation that was issued yesterday is for the budget papers that will come to Cabinet early in the new year and will go through the democratic process at that point. So for anyone who's watching, wondering why we aren't talking about the budget that was announced yesterday or the consultation on the budget, this is not that. It's just coincidental in the timing. So I'm going to pass to Councillor Brown to propose this report, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader. In the absence of Councillor Cox not being in the room, I'm very pleased to propose the report at item 6 for the medium-term financial plan update.
Do I have a seconder?
Chair, I'd like to second, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Councillor Cox, having been duly proposed and seconded, would you be able to present it on behalf of your colleagues? Thank you very much.
I will certainly do that, Leader. This paper is the latest iteration of the medium-term financial plan, which was last updated in the summer, and which starkly set out the mountain that BCP Council had to climb to avoid a Section 114 notice. Once officers had stripped out the unidentified savings and unrealistic assumptions, we were left with a £44 million budget deficit to fill. 30 million of this hole, the previous administration freely admit that they filled by raiding reserves year on year. The 23-24 budget set out in February was the second riskiest budget I hope this council has ever and will ever set. Only surpassed, of course, by the previous year's budget, which tried to sell off beach huts to fund Councillor Mellor and Councillor Broadhead's big plan. As well as trying to close the £44 million hole in 24-25, this administration is also trying to grapple with implementing the uber risky 23-24 budget, which proposed £34 million worth of savings and cuts, £9 million of which were completely unidentified. Over 6 months into the current year, 30% of these have yet to be delivered, putting the additional pressure on our reserves. To date, we have made some very difficult decisions and managed to reduce next year's budget deficit down to below £12 million. The next bit will no doubt be the hardest. One bit of news we are desperate to learn was perhaps some good news from the Chancellor's autumn statement, where perhaps, given the collapse of a number of high-profile councils, he may just decide to help out local councils with additional funding. Instead, we've heard yesterday that the national minimum living wage has been raised by an inflation-busting 9.8%, which will increase our 24-25 budget gap by 5.6 million. This is equivalent to 120 additional job losses, or withdrawing the whole of our cultural grant 4 times over. We must now aim for 50 million, not 44 million. The rise in the living wage, of course, is fantastic news for those employees, but without adequate compensation to local councils, the list of councils being issued with Section 114 notices will only grow. I do want to pay tribute to the many officers and directors who have taken up the challenge and put forward savings, efficiencies and yes, cuts in a collegiate spirit, knowing full well the difficulties that this will cause to their teams and residents. I also want to pay tribute to my fellow Cabinet colleagues for rising to this challenge and not shirking it. None of us came into politics for this sort of stuff, and it has to date been conducted with determination and stoicism. I therefore, as a Cabinet, I would recommend that we acknowledge the significant progress we've made to date and endorse the current position. I would also like to recommend we approve the voluntary redundancy process, which will support the delivery of a balanced budget. And I propose that we delegate that this is delegated to the CEO and the leader to develop the appropriate policy. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I think it's really sobering, isn't it, listening to the fact that we aren't just trying to fill the 44 million, now 50 million gap for next year, but actually trying to implement a budget that was based upon a lot of fantasy politics from last year. I don't think that's actually been put quite so succinctly before, and it's really very sobering. So yeah, quite scary. We don't have any council members from any other group who has come to actually contribute today, which is really very disappointing. Although maybe it's a realization that nobody has any better ideas about how we might work this going forward, or maybe it's a humility that perhaps they shouldn't turn up when they left us with such a nasty job to do. Either way, we are alone. There is nobody online. So can I pass to any of my Cabinet colleagues who would like to speak on this? Councillor Martin first, followed by Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. It's just a question, actually. So question to Councillor Cox. for the benefit of any residents who may be listening or who may read reports of our meetings, and indeed for any councillors who may not necessarily be quite so familiar with what Section 114 means, I wonder whether Councillor Cox could, in stark terms, outline precisely what happens when a council goes into 114 and what the implications are. Thanks very much.
Councillor Cox, did you want to come back?
Sure. Well, to the best of my knowledge, what happens when a Section 114 notice is issued is that government commissioners are appointed to take over the decision making in order to balance the budget. All non-statutory services will be either stopped or closed. Local decision making will end. I can guarantee, Councillor Martin, that the wrong decisions will be made at the wrong time. Many of us who've been to LGA events, including the Leader of the Opposition, have met councillors who have been subject to the Section 114 process, and the unanimous verdict is to avoid it at all costs.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I've just, you referenced the Leader of the Opposition attending. Yes, myself, the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Christchurch Independent Group were all at a local government association conference last week, where we had a presentation from two gentlemen who were commissioners, one of which had been the commissioner for Slough, which was one of the councils that very early doors went in. And I'll give you some of the words I picked up from him. There is good practice even in the poorest council. So, you know, that was a nice thing to say. He said intervention is not fun. It is not fun for commissioners, for members, or for staff. He went on to say that finding the real financial position in some of these councils is not easy, particularly in councils where they have several years of unaudited accounts. We're not in that position. Our accounts are not audited, not because of anything that has been done here, but because of delays in the auditing process. So thankfully, that is one area where I feel like we've got the right thing happening. But he went on to say, some councils think a Section 114 is the easy way out. It is not. It is at best 5 years of struggle, which could ultimately lead to further local government reorganisation. I think we've all had enough of that, and therefore I think that you know, the first thing we have to do is to take those really sensible steps. And interestingly, given how close we came to getting a capitalisation directive last year, he actually said the first stage is typically to get a capitalisation directive. So the fact that the previous administration actually thought that was the solution and then backed out when they realised what it means, but exposed us to all of the assurance and scrutiny that came with that, just shows that we really were teetering on the edge, and that actually we have taken a step back, that we know what the cliffs are like around here. They're a bit crumbly. So I'd really like to keep stepping back until we're on really, really firm ground. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, Councillor Cox covered some of the things. I would just prepared a couple of things to say, but I guess it's worth remembering, particularly for the public, you know, that the previous administration blamed the cost of living crisis, but behind that was the COVID crisis, and behind that was the Brexit crisis, and behind that is more than a decade of austerity. And that has been chipping away at the finances and the capital to support local services, at which time certain people have been making huge amounts of money. And I think, you know, none of us came in for this. These are not choices we make lightly. It's not why we stood for election. But as we did in 2020 when COVID hit, we've pretty much stopped what we were trying to do. We stopped the ship, and we can't just trim ourselves and plough on, and we're bailing like mad to try and make this work. And I think, you know, as Councillor Cox did, I thank our officers who have you know, with tears in their eyes, actually, you know, had to look at dismantling some of the services that they've made built up over decades, and the people that we're trying to support. certainly I stood to support our most vulnerable residents, to make sure our public space is shared and functional and pleasant, to maintain and protect our wonderful wildlife, and to support a resident and visitor economy. And those things are all under significant threat. So, the measures that we're proposing in this and are now out to consultation are not things we want to do. They're things we feel that we absolutely have to do in order to avoid the ship sinking. And I think that's really sad. And it's also, and I was talking to our local MP about this the other day, fundamentally there's insufficient funding for social care and children's services nationally. That's why half of the authorities in the country are at the brink. And we have that. And when I talk to our finance director, the thing that worries him most is about the special needs grant, which is another piece that's not in our MTFP directly, but the implications in terms of the interest on that is, and it's a threat that somebody's going to have to pay for the special needs grant. And again, we need government to make sensible decisions going forwards. And I think that's a real difficulty. We haven't got options here. We are really trying to do the best we can for the people in BCP. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. I actually was looking at a couple of contributions made that I saw in Hansard from the MP where I live, and interestingly, on the very rare occasion that he speaks, the last time he actually spoke about the area was in 2020, ironically. Since then, he's not talked about us, but he actually was in a debate about local government finance. And he referred to the issues around social care green paper, which, what happened to that? He acknowledged that Dorset and BCP had not fared well from the funding formula. He talked about the need for a long-term settlement, which we've never had. And he actually stated that he is increasingly aware that council tax is not a long-term solution to fund local services. Given that three of our MPs are now sirs, so that presumably gives them some, and one is the Solicitor General. You'd have thought, wouldn't you, that they'd have some influence in actually local government, especially as at least 3 of them, I think, have been councillors or council leaders in the past. So they understand this, and some of them are incredibly sympathetic to the position. So my ask is that please, can our MPs, not just for this area but for the whole country, step up and tell Rishi that we're more interested in this than we are in votes. And just to clarify, I did write with my colleagues, the leader of Southampton, the leader of Portsmouth, and the leader of the Isle of Wight Council, to the Chancellor of the Exchequer on Monday to actually ask them to consider the local government needs in the statement today. Goodness only knows what we'll get back. We have had an acknowledgement saying he hasn't got time to read our letter, but I can show you that. That is what the letter said. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, a few things to say on this. I just wanted to highlight paragraph 6 in the report, actually, which just says about, in support of these requirements, portfolio holders have been working with corporate directors, service directors and budget holders to prepare proposals for balancing the 24-25 budget. I mean, that paragraph, that sentence sort of summarises months and months of work. And actually today's, I think it's about 6 months today since the Three Towns Alliance took on the administration of this council. And I don't think, budgets and finances and the 44 million, now 50 million pound gap has probably formed the basis of conversations, discussions every week, 6 months, and meetings every week between portfolio holders and service directors, and between the cabinet and the corporate management board and the chief executive to actually just try and work out how on earth we are going to close this gap and avoid a section 114 notice. And the portfolio holders sort of summarise there, the consequences of that. So I'd really like to just acknowledge the work of the staff, and right down, all staff, who've sort of contributed to this up through their teams. I'm sure there's been lots of team meetings and discussions about working on budget figures and looking at potential savings areas and different ways of working. So I think we really need to acknowledge the extent of the work throughout the whole organisation to sort of get us to where we are at the moment, and there's still more work to do. I'm pleased that the portfolio holder did, and a couple of colleagues have said that none of us want to be here, none of us want to be making these decisions or doing this. But this is the result of 3 years of overspending. You only have to look at the budget reports for the last few years, and there were warnings within there that this council has been spending more than its income year on year on year, and you can only do that for so long. And we've got to the point where chickens are coming home to roost. You know, you can only depend on your savings until the savings run out and the savings account is empty and it's run out. So this is where we've got to, is the consequence of the last 3 years of the council not living within its means and spending more than its income. And the government's not helped us at all in this. A colleague just mentioned about adult social care reform. I remember a Prime Minister standing in Downing Street saying he was going to fix the social care system. Then there's a green paper, and then we haven't heard a lot since then, and we're still waiting. And the consequence of that is impacting our residents and people that depend on social care, but it's also council taxpayers that are suffering the consequences of that failure of government to actually proceed with that, because council taxpayers are now having to fund more and more of the social care system, when it really should be down to central government to sort out a system that actually has central government backing and funding and health service funding and actually works for everyone, and not depend on ratepayers, council taxpayers, to actually fill the gap. So unfortunately, our council taxpayers are having to suffer the consequences of government's failure to actually sort out legislation, sort out the care system, and actually come up with a workable system. I have some hopes that maybe in today's autumn statement, the Chancellor may make some announcements that could help us. I suppose we'll have to live in hope and have to be optimistic. But unfortunately, as has been mentioned, the announcement yesterday about the 9.8% increase in living wage, over £1 an hour increase to £11.44, massively inflation busting, way above what ourselves and probably most councils had anticipated. And the exposure this council has as a major employer, and particularly in social care and the care area, you know, for every penny of that, there's approximately estimated to be £122,000 additional cost to the council for every penny of national living wage increase. So that pound, by my rough calculations, we're looking at we'd already made an allowance towards it, but now we're going to have to find another 5.6 million, I understand, to actually fill the unexpected increase there. But that's probably about roughly £12 million the increase in national living wage is going to cost this council next year. That's more than a 5% increase in council tax. So just that one decision yesterday about the increase in national living wage, the increased cost for the council is more than a 5% increase in council tax can cover. And that's just that one thing, let alone the myriad of other pressures and other expenditures and other inflationary increases this council's got to face. And that's just, you know, the financing of local government is broken if a maximum 5% council tax increase can't even cover one change like the increase in national living wage. I think that's probably all I've got to say. I will be listening intently to what the Chancellor's got to say today to see if there's any good news for us. But I do fear, after yesterday's announcement about national living wage, I suspect there are a lot of other councils that are in a worse state than BCP who will end up now having to go through a Section 114 notice and bankruptcy, just because of that one announcement by the Treasury yesterday. I suspect there's a lot of councils' budgets that will just not be able to withstand that increase.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to echo, first of all, the thoughts of a number of Cabinet members in expressing appreciation to officers for all the work that they've been doing to try to ease this incredibly difficult situation. So my thanks to them. Councillor Cox and Councillor Brown have already put something of the context in which we're operating and explained the local situation in terms of the overspending for the past few years and the raiding of reserves. There's another bit of that context that hasn't been mentioned yet that I think ought to be expressed, and it's a figure that comes from the head of finance. I follow social media a reasonable amount, and residents are regularly complaining that they pay the council tax, so why aren't we? And what I think is not clear in the public arena is the fact that councils not only rely on council tax in order to pay for services, we have also relied on government grant. And the calculation that I remember the Head of Finance briefing us on was looking back in 2010 at the amount of government grant that the then councils serving this area received, and comparing it with what we receive now, there is a £106 million cut in grant, and that's £106 million less we receive from central government every single year. If that cut had not been made, we would not only have no budget gap whatsoever, we would have an additional £50+ million a year to spend, so that we could be providing services of the kind that we would like to, and the kind that residents expect and need. So there is additional concern about the way in which central government is failing to support not just this council, but councils right across the country. As you know, Chair, I represented the council on Friday at a meeting of the South West councils, where there were representatives from all of the councils from South West England present, and there was the government minister present, who introduced himself and made some very warm words about wanting to work with councils and support us, and gratitude for all that we do. He was then faced with quite a number of the representatives, including myself, expressing real concern about the financial situation that we are all facing, underlining the fact that 1 in 10 councils across the United Kingdom is currently close to bankruptcy, indicating other particular financial difficulties, including adult social care, as Councillor Brown has already referred to. And he was asked quite directly what central government would do to help councils deliver the services that we want to deliver. He made absolutely no promises whatsoever. He was indicating, if anything, nothing would happen. What he failed to mention was anything about the additional pressure that Councillor Cox has referred to with the increase in the living wage and the additional 5 million that we are experiencing, and that every one of those councils present at that meeting will also experience as an additional budget pressure. And I find it difficult to believe that nothing had been said within government to alert that department that there would be an additional pressure experienced by local councils. So real disappointment in the government's failure to support local government and the work that we do. Real disappointment in the annual cuts that have taken place in grant. Real disappointment in what was feigned sympathy for councils, but no help in reality. And Councillor Cox is still hopeful. Councillor Brown seems to be still hopeful that in the autumn statement, the Chancellor might say something that will relieve our difficulties. I'm not hopeful. I don't believe he will. I think we have a government that does not care about council services, and by implication that does not care about the services that our residents need, deserve, and regularly complain they do not receive to the level that they should. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. I would just add that, you want to correct a number, don't you, Adam? I was itching to do so as well. So that the reduction is from 106 million to 6 million, therefore a reduction of 100 million a year, not 106. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, just to confirm, the leader's absolutely correct. My calculation is that if BCP Council had existed in 2010, and you looked at the scale of the reductions in annual government grants for Poole Council, for Bournemouth Council, for Christchurch Council, and for about 12% of Dorset County Council, added that all together, compared it to what BCP is actually currently receiving, and acknowledged the changes in funding that occurred during that period, then actually the figure is £100 million less annually we are getting in government grant funding than we would have been.
May I come back and apologise to Adam for misremembering? I did remember a figure correctly, but not quite the right figure. The 100 million is nevertheless a massive amount, and the point stands.
The point does indeed stand. 100 million would still give us 50 million pounds a year ish to go into the reserves or spend on services. Just to clarify, that minister was also a councillor. Interestingly, he was a councillor in David Cameron's constituency prior to being selected for North Dorset. I say no more about that. I share Councillor Hannah's concern about today's autumn statement, and in fact I said it in an interview yesterday, which may or may not get revealed today. My biggest fear is that what we will see is a tax cut for individuals or a pay rise for those at the bottom, and then we will see the council being allowed to charge people more, so that the councils are blamed for taking money out of residents' pockets, so that the government can go into a general election, possibly in May, given that they've just given everyone a pay rise in April. You know, that would be very cynical, but probably likely. So I don't have that confidence either. I hope that Councillor Cox and Councillor Brown are right, and if you're right, I will gladly buy your bar of chocolate. That's as far as it goes. Okay, is there anybody else wants to add anything on this before we acknowledge the recommendations, which is an acknowledgement and endorsement, and then the voluntary redundancy process, which is something that, you know, we don't want to be doing, but there are people who might choose to do this rather than us have to face the possibility of compulsory redundancies down the line. Yeah. It is just worth adding, obviously there are costs involved with redundancies, whatever type of redundancies there are. There is money baked into the budget that is to cover a level of redundancies, and obviously we need to be clear that the people that we're making us, or people who are offering to leave the organisation, we need to make sure that they're not people that are going to make the situation worse. So yeah, that is a very careful piece of work that the team will be doing. So you know, I feel for them having to do that. So if there's nobody else, Councillor Cox, did you want to sum up at all?
No, thank you. I think everybody's said exactly what they need to say. I think we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go.
Thank you. So given it is a really important thing that we're doing, I am going to ask people to vote, because I think it's important that we all, you know, we all sort of put our hands in the air for this. So all those in favour of the recommendations A to C, that is unanimous. Thank you. It takes us on to item 7, which is the budget monitoring 23-24 Q2 update. Councillor Brown, can I ask you again?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, as our portfolio holder is online and not in the room, I'm happy to propose the recommendation that Cabinet note the budget monitoring position for Q2 2023-24.
And do I have a second? Councillor Wilson, thank you very much. Councillor Cox, obviously there are some areas here that we've talked about, so if you want to just point us to the areas which perhaps are important updates.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to Councillor Brown for filling in for me. As I've already indicated in the previous item, the current year budget, as it was described by the Section 151 officer at the time, was full to the brim of risks. Putting aside a further £30 million drawdown of reserves to pay for day-to-day expenditure, there was an unprecedented level of savings to be achieved, 30% of which were unidentified transformation savings. To date, we have only been able to identify 24 million of the 34 million savings needed, and so forth, we are currently running £10 million short. In addition, we have some significant in-year pressures, not least of which is the fall in parking revenue as a result of the washout summer we have all had to endure. This is the problem of a local council relying on the British summer to fund statutory services, and a fundamental reason for retaining adequate reserves. However, this administration took early action by bringing in a spending and recruitment freeze, which has helped to limit the overall in-year pressures to below £5 million. Given the challenge we face in 24-25, we simply cannot afford to miss this year's budget target. I would draw Cabinet colleagues' attention to tables 3 and 4, which set out in stark terms the fine line we are treading with the reduction in council reserves, both earmarked and unearmarked, as well as the ballooning dedicated schools grant deficit, which will plunge this council into an overall deficit position by 31st of March 2024. I can therefore recommend to Cabinet that they note the current position and continue to work with directors to balance the current year position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Has anybody got, just before we go to Cabinet, I know we now do have a member, not a non-exec member here. Councillor Tarling, did you want to speak on this item before I go to Cabinet? If you do, just pop your hand up now, otherwise we'll move on and just have you observing.
No, just observing. Thank you, Leader.
That's fine, Councillor Tarling. We'll always give our members that are not on Cabinet the first chance to speak. So with that, I'll go to Councillor Hadley, who had his hand first in the air.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I just wanted to highlight on page 57, part of Appendix A3, there are a number of items under environment which are red in the report, which indicates that they're facing the wrong way in terms of the cost pressures. And really the variability on things like our waste costs. There's a really high volatility in the worldwide market prices of recyclable materials and black bin costs. It changes daily. At the moment, we're hoping that gap will be closing, but it is entirely dependent on the international markets and not something that we can very easily influence beyond trying to be on the ball with what we can do with that. That does include a reduction in getting money back in, and I thought that might be around the new for you. It's not. It's around things like metals and batteries and things that we can get an income for. Again, that's reduced. New for you is actually very buoyant. We are going to have to relocate it because we need to release the site that they're currently at. But it is something that is good in terms of reusing things that people no longer need. And it perhaps is a measure of that people are turning to that rather than buying stuff that's new. Highways maintenance is also a significant challenge, and there was a very recent announcement, the government ditching HS2 extension in favour of potholes rather than a strategic spend on infrastructure. Our share, which is about 600,000 next year, doesn't really fill the financial hole of just the inflationary pressure on the materials that we use to stick in potholes. So it's dressed as good news, but actually it's really only going to make us stand still. And there's a real worry that there is a separate potholes fund which we think might disappear. So there's something about, are they giving with one hand and quietly taking that money back with the other? And of course, we also need to worry about juggling between filling potholes and resurfacing roads in an increasingly challenging weather conditions, because the very wet weather washes out the road surface. I think we have a continuing struggle, and it's just an example, I guess, of what we face across the list of things in this report. Thank you.
Did anyone else want to speak? If not, I'll just add something which might seem pretty minor, but I suppose it's sort of it's on the basis of looking after the pennies. I was quite shocked recently when I had a reason to look in a bin, and I was really shocked at how much recycling was still in black bins. And I suppose there is a thing here where our residents could help us by. It costs us a lot more to dispose of black bin residual waste than it does recycling. Even though it used to be able to make money from recycling, it now does cost us less to get rid of. And actually every single household being more responsible, firstly in, using less and therefore having less waste, but actually being more thoughtful about what they do with their waste and making sure that their recycling isn't contaminated and that there isn't recycling in their black bin waste, it can save us huge amounts of money. There are new rules coming down the line in 2025, I think, about what the council's got to do in terms of food waste to every home, including flats. But it's also about making sure that every property is properly separating the rubbish from the recycling, which is going to be tough in flats. It's going to be tough in public spaces. But it is something that people can do, and the issue, we're always being criticised for the drains not being emptied as much as we might like, but actually where people have got lots of leaves from their own gardens, we could reduce the number of leaves blocking drains by people actually sweeping up the leaves and putting them in their green bins if they've got one, or they're composting. It's just those little things that we can all do that just takes a little bit of pressure off, so that when the council is having to rethink about how long those rounds are and how big those gaps are in between, what we can all do, and that will, some people will say, well, what's the point of me paying my council tax? But we've already heard 2/3 or more of the council tax is actually going on providing social care for very vulnerable people. That doesn't leave an awful lot for the things that people think traditionally are paid for. So if we can take the pressure off that, as 200,000 households, it's sort of incumbent on us all to do that, I think. Anybody else want to add anything? If not, I think we've had quite a robust discussion in the first half, and there's lots of crossover. Councillor Cox, is there anything you wanted to say in closure?
No, I just wanted to thank Councillor Hadley for highlighting the items he did do. And I think that just shows the risks that we're carrying in the current year, never mind the risks that we're just about to embark on in next year. And all the more reason to have adequate reserves moving forward in order to manage the variances in various budgets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. That takes us to agenda item 8, which is the future of Bournemouth Air Festival. This one is due to be proposed and presented by Councillor Earl. Do we have a seconder for this one, please?
I'll second that, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. So I'm going to pass over to Councillor Earl to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Leader. So obviously just coming out that budget context, I think that really sets the scene for where we are with some of those non-statutory services and some of those things that we provide, such as the Bournemouth Air Festival. So this paper has taken a lot of work, and it's been developed over quite a few months in terms of our work with the industry as well. I just want to talk through some of the key elements of what we're actually proposing with the Air Festival going forward. So at the moment, we're going to be keeping a £200,000 net cost contribution, but for the 2024 Air Festival. But that will be contingent on is making sure we can raise £100,000 through sponsorship, through donations, through improving our commercial activities, and really trying to bridge that gap so that we're not going to be a council that is subsidising this festival rather than it can actually work for us and support the tourism industry as well. The costs to deliver the Air Festival at the moment, they have risen quite significantly over the last few years, but we're also expecting them to rise a bit further, and in that context of the budget, it's going to become something that's even more and more difficult for us to fund through local government finances, considering the cuts we've had from central government as well. So the task here was really to look at how we can deliver an event, a large scale event that supports the tourist industry, but doesn't put that pressure on the council where we can't actually sustain that pressure. So we started out with a task and finish group to talk to industry representatives and to explore the Air Festival in detail, to really look at the costs and find out if there is a way to fund it sustainably, and also to look at whether it actually needs a bit of a refresh and a bit of a change, because it has been pretty much, very similar to previous years well, since it started really. The paper really goes into the costs, and this is the first time that as a council we've looked really closely at what various elements of this are costing to us. And the recommendation now is to look to a 3-day air festival, with a 4th day that is driven by sort of our external organisation. So where we've been working with the Task and Finish group, they've suggested potentially a community day or something else on the Sunday, which would be driven by the bids, by local business, by residents organisations and so on, which might try and bring tourists out of Bournemouth as well and into areas like Poole and Christchurch, so that they can get some of that advantage of the air festival and the visitation from outside of the area. I'm really pleased that I went to the meeting of the BH Area Hospitality Association a week and a half ago, and they actually agreed to fund a really key element of the Air Festival, which is accommodation for our display teams. We've also been looking at things like crowdfunding, because we know lots of people are really passionate about the Air Festival, and this is about being able to turn that passion into delivering a sustainable event. And also looking at things like our car parking, and whether we can actually bring in a bit more through those commercial opportunities already. So there's quite a lot in the paper. It goes into quite a lot of detail around some of those areas which were explored. Looking to the future, though, there is an opportunity to develop the Air Festival into something being as creative and sustainable as possible, both financially and in terms of what it actually is and the content that's in it. We want to be clear that actually in 2025 we won't be funding the Air Festival in the same way, but we do have potential opportunities, and the paper talks about an accommodation business improvement district, which may offer an avenue to us and to the industry to not only develop the event creatively, but also to look at funding it sustainably. So I think it's really just a case of us looking at 2024, how can we raise that additional 100k to see us through, but then also really embracing the sectors involved in this and embracing the businesses in our community and making sure that we're working together to deliver something long term that does also have the pull of something like the Air Festival, but maybe brings it a bit more up to date. I just wanted to mention as well about the petitions that we mentioned earlier. There are 2 current petitions. Only one of them is on the council website, and that's titled Continue the Air Festival, which has 100 signatures. It closes next week, and therefore it hasn't been presented to us today. There is a second one, which is supported by the Bournemouth Air Festival Patrons Club, but that also hasn't been submitted for this meeting. And there may be other ones out there, but I won't go into detail. Where we are, and we're looking at not funding this further into 2025, that decision has been come to and discussed with the industry. I think we're all actually quite comfortable with the current position. If we were to then, in terms of having a debate in full council on this, then we would need a petition with around 2,000 signatures on it to qualify for that discussion. So yeah, I'm happy to present this paper. I think a lot of us have put a lot of work into it, and especially the officers who have actually done a really good job in us making lots of changes and suggestions, and the work of the Task and Finish group as well. So very happy to leave it there.
Thank you. Before I go to members of Cabinet, any non-members of Cabinet, the one person online wishing to speak on this? There haven't been any.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you.
Yes, Councillor Tarling would like to speak. Go ahead, Councillor
Yes,
Tarling.
right. Yeah.
Welcome to Cabinet.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I think as a non-cabinet member, I can't say I can represent the rest of the council members necessarily, but I shall say my piece. Just really commend the officers and Councillor Earl for the work that's been done on this, and the fact that under a barrage of of criticism on social media that we've seen from a number of corners, that we've actually got to the bottom of what it costs, and the fact that I think the previous administration has seen it as a sort of bottomless pit, open wallet for the festival to take money out, knowing that personally that we are facing cuts to the library service. I think it's got to be put in cold terms that some of our services are being cut, and £500,000 of expenditure is not feasible. And I really do commend this idea of alternative funding strategies, whether it's through the A bid or other sponsors. I really think it's great. For me personally, I'm happy if it's not every year, if it's a biannual event. I wouldn't want to see it go completely. I think to keep some continuity would be a great thing for Bournemouth and the wider area, but maybe the shape of it does need to change. And as all things that we're trying to do with this administration, I think public consultation is the way forward. And I appreciate that this coming year, what we've come up with is a solution that stops the gap, really, that keeps some continuity, but also, I think, recognises the financial pressures of this budget. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Tarling. So, who's going to go first? Councillor Hadley, and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Leader. I read an account at the weekend of the difficult decision last week by Martin Oliver to cancel the 2024 Great Dorset Steam Fair. Costs for them have ballooned, and they estimate a need to inflate the entrance fee by 70% to cover the £5 million setup costs. The news was met with much dismay by those who visited for decades, and I remember going as a kid. It's been going for many decades, but it was accepted by the public that it was a difficult decision that was being made by the organisers, and that clearly they needed to forecast to run at a profit in order to run the show. They put the show on the market but had no takers. It's the end of an era. We were told by the previous administration, indeed by a local MP, that the Bournemouth Air Show is very profitable, and that in addition to the large benefits to businesses, it benefits our car parking income hugely. We knew this to be a huge exaggeration and another example of poor Conservative financial management. In truth, they really didn't know the true costs of running the event. Thanks to a lot of diligent work by the officers, the costs we now know are of the order of £1 million. We know these are going to increase. Half of that is covered by fees to stall holders, VIP places and sales of programmes, but half of it is not. In addition to the budgeted costs, again, the paper shows there is £250,000 in council officers' time preparing for and supporting the event. In the fortnight leading up to the event, we found an awful lot of the staff time being taken to run the event. Can't deal with other council matters because we're busy running the air show. In paragraph 17, it acknowledges the net car parking benefit is not significant because of the extra costs involved in managing traffic coming to the area. The seafront catering makes the princely sum of £7,000 extra from the £70,000 additional turnover. I've had several people declare that the air show is nothing without the red arrows. We know they're the main draw, and they're not available to us this year. I understand, although the Deputy Leader highlighted that the seafront hotels have undertaken to fund the pilot's accommodation, we've not actually had that confirmed in writing. Given all the difficult decisions and cuts that we're having to make to essential services for our residents and to other events and services, I just don't think it's defensible to agree to spend nearly £500,000 on the air show next year, including underwriting that 100,000 that we hope will be raised by subscriptions or sponsorship. We are still £11 million short of reaching a balanced budget. The air show has been a great spectacle, but the right decision now is to call a stop. We promised to return to concentrating on the basics, and this is not essential spend. If we have money for events, it should be spread across the year and across the 3 towns. And I haven't yet mentioned how this sits with the climate emergency. You know that it doesn't. I'm afraid I can't support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Leader. Just a couple of points, if I may. I'm very pleased to second the proposal. As I've said on a number of occasions in the Task and Finish group, in another less complicated life, I was involved with the Air Festival since its inception in 2008. and also from a charity point of view, with my involvement in a couple of charities. Can I thank all the partners and stakeholders that have taken part in the Task and Finish group in the past few months, and clearly that work will continue and needs to continue. And I would also like to thank the officers for some hard work on this. I know it's invidious to pick anyone out in particular, but I would like to especially say thank you to Amanda Barry, who's done incredible work on this. I think it's one of the most important things is that we have a robust approach to finding the sponsorship. I do believe there are people out there, and I have heard some extraordinary names of people, of organisations that would be interested. I'm not going to say who they are, but who might well be interested in the Air Festival. In fact, were potentially interested in the last one this year. So working with the private sector, we really need to take a proactive, robust approach to closing that gap in the funding, and I'm sure we can. In terms of the Air Festival itself, I think Councillor Earl said it hasn't changed much in recent years, hasn't really changed much since 2008. And I think this is a huge opportunity now for the Air Festival to be a stepping stone to something else in 2025, not necessarily dismissing aircraft completely, but actually something that's more about innovation. We've got incredible innovation in this area. I think we know the success of the STEM marquee. That has got enormous potential. You won't be surprised to know that I also think that arts and culture could play a part in whatever the Air Festival or whatever this big festival looks like in 2025. And actually, just as a matter of interest, I am meeting this afternoon a representative of a nationally and soon to be internationally renowned virtual reality company who have expressed an interest in doing something with us in Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch next year and the year after. So, as I said, lots of potential opportunity here. I think this is exciting because it's a time to change and take things forward. Finally, can I just, don't really want to get into the politics of it, but I do have to reference the member for Bournemouth East, Tobias Elwood, who has been a member of the government for 7 years, was a member of the government for 7 or 8 years as a minister. That government that has already been referenced has cut funding, disinvested in local authorities for 13 consecutive years, and led to a situation where local government in this country is broken. So I said in some interviews last week, I thought it was a bit rich of Tobias Elwood to bang on about the Air Festival and to mislead everybody with his numbers that are completely wrong. It's more than a bit rich. He's got a nerve, quite frankly. And I have to say, somebody was talking about the barrage of criticism on social media about the Air Festival. Well, first of all, social media is not the real world. And secondly, we're not exactly inundated with people who wanted to come and either stand outside and protest or come and make their points at today's meeting. So I think people get it, frankly. And my final point would be, Mr. Elwood is clearly getting some poor local advice. I don't know who's giving him advice, but maybe others know than I do. But I'll just leave it there. Thank you, Lena.
Councillor Cox, would you like to recover your composure? You can come in next, followed by Councillor Burton. I'm looking forward to the tweet already.
Thank you, Leader. I think we all know who Councillor Martin is talking about. I just wanted to emphasise the fact that it would have been very, and I want to just say on record that I agree with an awful lot of what Councillor Hadley has just said. And it would have been politically very easy for us to cancel this event, given the amount of savings and cuts that we're having to endure this year. I just wanted to correct Councillor Hadley on just one little issue. I don't believe we are underwriting the sponsorship. If the sponsorship doesn't come in, the event doesn't happen, as far as I'm concerned. A huge amount, I wanted to emphasise as well, it's already been said that a huge amount of work has been done to identify and to share the issues and the problems that the current format of the airshow has. And I also wanted to thank all those that contributed towards trying to renew the airshow in a new kind of format. I do feel as though we're I know many people are turning around and saying, well, maybe why are we spending so much money on an airshow when we're making cuts in various other places? Well, we have said that we would continue with we would try and continue with fund the airshow for at least 1 year and not afterwards. So in reality, what we're doing is we're halving our contribution to the airshow in next year, and it goes completely the year afterwards. So we are our contribution towards this festival will effectively be eliminated, but it will be over 2 years rather than 1 year. But we have provided that space in which to provide a positive platform, in my opinion, to continue with an air festival, albeit in a different format in the future. So that's just points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Burton.
Thank you very much, Leader. I must admit, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for the Air Festival, and I should really declare an interest here because it was probably 10 years ago this summer that my daughter had her first date walking from Poole to Bournemouth to look at the air show, and I shall be speaking at her wedding next year to the very person that she walked that distance with, and therefore I understand spending some money short term to get some gains in the future, but yeah. Looking back, the Air Festival is something that I've never thought about who paid for it. It's something that always happened, and a lot of people enjoyed it. I know some people don't. Some people avoid it. Lots of people go to look at it. I don't think until we've started looking at it that anybody really tracked where the money came from and went. It's always said lots of money is made here, but nobody really said, well, who spends the money, who makes the money. I'm loath to go, we just want to get rid of the Air Festival, but I do totally understand, and I believe that the people who enjoy it and the people who make money out of it should be the people who pay for it and not the local authority. I've one question, just going back to the previous paper or the paper before. If we were to have a section 114 notice and the commissioners was appointed, what would they do with them spending on the Air Festival? I don't know if anybody, I don't know if that's a rhetorical question, if anybody can answer that. So I agree this should be the way forward. It will be a shame to see it all go, but it has to be funded by local businesses. It's a big plea from me. If you are somebody who enjoys it, or somebody who makes money out of it happening, think about what you can do to ensure it continues by your money, not ours.
Councillor Cox, did you have the answer?
Yes, it would be cancelled.
Thank you. I mean, clearly we're trying to avoid that position, so it wouldn't be the only thing that's cancelled. There'd be lots of other things that people enjoy in different spheres, whether it be the contributions to the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, whether it be Pavilion Dance, Arts by the Sea, all of those things would go. And this area is an area that people flock to for what they can do. And it's an area that people live here because of what we enjoy, not just for the basics. I think it's important to reflect that. I suspect that one of the reasons why we have a bit of a chair malfunction. No, nobody's noticed at all. It's just distracted me completely. I suspect one of the reasons that the sponsorship levels over the last few years have been so poor is because this was a sacred cow, and therefore nobody was willing to take the difficult decisions. I think the fact that we have made it absolutely crystal clear that it would be potentially really disruptive and irresponsible to cancel it for next year, but actually the right thing to do to say, that's it, guys, if you want it, pay for it. We have had approaches already since we made the announcement that we were looking at this. We have had businesses and individuals who've come forward. We have had people who've said, I would gladly pay an entrance fee. And I think now is the time to put your money where your mouth is, because this gives us an opportunity to say, if people do not put their money where their mouth is, then we know what the outcome is. I think it's horrifying, some of these figures that have been spent year on year on year without anybody really asking the question. You know, I think it's crazy that even the VIP hospitality and sandbar makes a grand total of £12,000. I mean, seriously? I mean, that is madness. You know, if somebody can't run a VIP hospitality making more than £3,000 a day in profit for the biggest event on the south coast, then there's a major problem. And I think we do have to do what we're doing in other areas and say the elements of this that are not that take a lot of time and energy but don't actually generate an income, when they could be done profitably. Some things are never going to make a profit. You know, insurance is always going to cost an eye-watering amount, and barriers and things like that. And they would do if it was a different type of event. But things like hospitality not making money, I mean, there's something wrong there. So I want to thank all of the people in industry and residents and organisations that have helped. I think their eyes have been opened. I think they have been grateful to have been cited on information that they've never been cited on before. And I think that's one of the marks of this administration, is about transparency. The public can now see just how much these things cost and just how much effort goes in. And if next year is the last one, so be it. If people value it, then they need to come forward now, and we welcome people's donations, cash, cheques, credit cards, whatever you like. We'll take your money, and we can guarantee it'll go towards this event. But it is a difficult decision. We did make a commitment in our alternative budget that we would only fund it to £200,000. And I agree, it would be easier just to say, oh, sorry, we can't do it. Huge sympathy for the environmental issues. The environmental costs are changing. I know from talking to the Red Arrows pilots, they're now using biofuel. We are looking at other alternatives to things that are bad on the environment, but a huge amount of the environmental impact is on people travelling here. And we need to do more to make that park and ride make money, because for a park and ride to lose money, again, something's not right there. So hopefully our transport partners will step up, our hospitality partners will step up. If the accommodation bid does come through, that feels like a really good element for them to be thinking about. Their job, if the accommodation bid comes through, is to actually market the place and market what happens in the place. And if they decide that this is something they want to contribute to, then great. If they decide it isn't, then that's even the industry talking. So, you know, I think this is the perfect way of doing that. And actually, they can't do it any quicker than 2025, because that process is a legal process that hasn't yet gone through. So, Councillor Hadley, do you want to come back?
Yes, if I may, it's just so to Councillor Cox's point around contingency. On page 83, it clearly suggests that as part of the risk assessment that we will be underwriting the sum. And I guess there are other costs like the police, where we're suggesting that they might need to charge for things that they've offered us for free for the festival previously. So I just wonder, what is the decision point? I mean, we're making a decision today about running the festival, but you say it won't run if we can't raise the money, or if people are not coming forward with their money in the way that the leaders just outlined to support the festival. At what point do we pull the plug if that sponsorship is not, if they don't show us the colour of their money? Because clearly there will be costs accruing from the timetable I'm looking at suggests from certainly February, March time, we would be committing significant monies that if we don't run the festival, we'll have spent the money anyway. And so at what point do we have a decision that says the public do really want the festival? Because at the moment we've got 100 people on the petition. That's not a lot of people. You know, we need people to come forward in much larger numbers if they really think they are prepared to fund the gap. I see in that risk assessment that we are underwriting that extra 100,000, or we'll commit money and then not have an FS, which would be the worst of both worlds.
Councillor Cox.
As far as I'm concerned, if we haven't seen £100,000 contribution coming into the Bournemouth Air Festival by the time we start spending money, then the event doesn't happen.
we still have several months of that, and there have been
Yeah.
very intense conversations happening on a fortnightly basis. So I think, you know, we have to take a decision today. As a council, we have a process that does not allow us to do things until we have taken a decision. We have officers waiting to do a lot of the work that they cannot do anymore until we decide. I think we know that Councillor Hadley isn't going to support this. I think that's been fairly clear. But we have to move forward with a decision, because if we don't have a decision, then we're leaving everything up in the air, and we're not putting officers in the place to carry on with the next stage. So I think we need to just accept that and move on. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, colleagues have sort of said most of what I was thinking of saying. I enjoy the Air Festival, as many residents do, and would like to see it continue, but that is just no longer financially possible in the current position. I am really pleased to finally see in this report, and you know, any of the public listening or people that comment on this, I'd refer to the tables and the financial figures in the report, because it's really pleasing that the costs and the income of the Air Festival is now clear. In broad terms, it's, you know, looking at around a £1 million cost each year, and the council gains an income of around £500,000. So net cost to the council and the council taxpayers is around £500,000. It's really not helped that to have others spreading fictitious figures around the costs and income from the Air Festival. As already highlighted in earlier discussions in this meeting, that the council's in a really difficult financial state, largely as a result of 3 years of overspending and relying on the council savings account. So in effect, the Air Festival the last few years has been subsidised from the council's reserves, but the piggy bank is now empty. You know, we've shaken it around, and there is no £500,000 sat in the piggy bank anymore for us to draw out and fund the cost of the Air Festival. I'm really pleased to see the progress of the working group and the potential alternative funding approach from 2025 onwards, and I hope that those plans can come to fruition. Councillor Earl mentioned about petitions, and Councillor Martin's mentioned about the local MP Tobias Elwood, and I understand he's got his own petition going and set it up, but it's not before us today. Usually the process with petitions is that the names are collected before a decision and they're presented to the decision makers to influence that decision, but not in this case. We've got no petition before us. So I think we should apologise to anyone who's basically wasted their time by signing that MP's petition, because it's gone nowhere. It's gone to him. He knows who signed it, how many people, and what the views are, and he's not passed that on to the council, and we're here at the point of making the decision, so he's basically wasted everybody's time. I would suggest maybe we should have a petition to that MP to work in government that he's been in for many years, to support local council funding to allow councils to fund major events and the tourism industry. I'd be happy to set up a petition to that effect, and then maybe Mr. Elwood could take on board those views. To be honest, in light of yesterday's announcement about the national living wage increase and the consequential further £5.6 million hit to our finances, I am in two minds about supporting this expenditure for next year, but I will support the recommendation. I think it's important to give it a chance to sort of continue and have a future from 2025 onwards, if others are willing to come in and or other funding models are proposed. But it is going to be difficult even to find the funding for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. If there's nobody else, before I pass back to Councillor Earl to sum up, I just want to say that my door is open to any local business or national business or international business who would like to come in and work with us. We are, you know, really keen to hear from you, and we expect to hear from you, because if we don't hear from you and then you complain if it goes, it will be on you, not on us, because our doors are wide open, and I will make time for a coffee with any business other than somebody that's involved in something really unpleasant, obviously, but any reasonable ethical business that wishes to come forward and support this or be part of taking over some of the costs of this, we want to hear from you. Please do not wait to be called. You need to call us because we need your help. All right, now, Councillor Earl, I'll leave you to sum up.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting discussion on that as well. And like Councillor Cox, I really sympathise with Councillor Hadley as well. I think there's an opportunity here, which is that compromise somewhere between being able to pass it on to the industry, but also be very clear that beyond that, it's not something that we can continue to fund as blindly as we have done. I'm also really surprised that we don't have the MP with us today. You know, they could have come and spoken at Cabinet, or at least a representative from their council group could have, but we're just not seeing it. So I'm quite happy to have heard everyone's contributions, and just want to as well highlight that thanks to officers and also to the task and finish group and all the people who have contributed to get us to this stage, because it has been a lot of work, and everyone's really pulled out the stops. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Earl. So with that, I'm fairly confident we're not going to have a unanimous one on this one, so I am going to ask for a vote. So all those in favour of the recommendations as per the paper? 7 votes for. All those against? 1 vote against. Thank you, Councillor Hadley. And obviously Councillor Cox isn't allowed to vote because he is online. So that is passed, but it is a very clear message that we need to send out on that, and we look forward to working very closely with the task and finish group over the coming weeks to move that to the next stage. Agenda item 9 is urgent decisions taken by the Chief Exec in accordance with the Constitution. Can I pass to the Chief Exec, please?
Thank you, Lou. There's just been one urgent decision, which was the acceptance of grant funding from the Department of Transport for £482,000 for a pilot scheme to tackle antisocial behaviour on the public transport network.
Thank you. I know that was a really welcome grant that we've got that will hopefully make our buses and our bus stations a much more pleasant place to be. It's really good work being done by the team led by our head of public protection in moving that forward in conjunction with transportation. Agenda item 10 is the Cabinet Forward Plan, and as is traditional, we note that this was published on the 14th, and we at this point I think we have a pretty meaty December and an even meatier, perhaps I shouldn't use that phrase, very full agenda for January. I think there is a conversation about potentially having to have a much longer 2-part cabinet in January if we can't move things around, to make sure that we get good decision making. So as soon as we've got clarification on whether that will be a morning and an afternoon session or whether things will be moved, we will make that public to give the public plenty of time. So if there's nothing further to add, it is now 11:34 and I'll close the meeting. Thank you.